Hello, my name's Rob and I'm part of the clergy team here in Portishead. It's really lovely to have you with us for this week's thought. We find ourselves in the middle of our season of mourning for Queen Elizabeth II. Many of us have perhaps been rather surprised by how unsettling, how affecting we have found the death of Her Majesty. It's been a difficult time. Queen Elizabeth has been on the throne for a little over 70 years. When she came to the throne in 1952, it was a very, very different Britain that she came to. In fact, we were still at the forefront of an empire. She came to the throne in the years following the Second World War, when things were challenging and difficult, when rationing was still in place. She came to a Britain where there was still deference towards authority, something that has largely disappeared since then. TV was just beginning to come into people's homes very, very slowly and gradually. And in fact, the televising of the Queen's coronation was rather controversial, but something that was important to Her Majesty. And of course, the current digital age and the advent of the internet were unimaginable things. And the Queen has been a constant through all that time of change. She has been present for us all. And she has deftly led the monarchy through a cautious, gradual, but real process of modernisation. Perhaps there's more to do there, and perhaps King Charles III will take us further. But it is remarkable how politically adroit the Queen always was. But of course, there have been very particular challenges over the last 2 or 3 years which have affected us all and have affected the mood of the country. COVID is, of course, perhaps the largest of those, but since then there's been the Ukraine war, there's been the cost of living crisis, which is just beginning to impact us. And this summer we've been aware, perhaps more than we ever have before, of how real the hot breath of climate change on our necks is. And so into this, the death of the Queen, that constant through, well, certainly far more than my life, for most of us, all that we can remember, has had a particular impact, has been particularly unsettling. I'm going to read just a few verses from the book of Ecclesiastes, quite familiar verses, but rather powerful and lovely, from Ecclesiastes 3. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. Those few verses remind us that everything has its season and its time. It's easy it's probably pretty tempting for us to live as though what is shall always be, that things will not change. But of course they do. Everything has its time. And it is important for us to remember that. To remember that if we live in a certain way, that will have an impact. It will have an impact on our lives and the lives of our children and grandchildren. That the world may not always be as it is now. And of course, the Queen's death, the death of any who we love, are painful reminders that people too have their time. There is a time to die, just as there is a time to be born. There is a time to mourn, and we find ourselves in that time too. But the Queen's life reminds us that we are too people of hope, of her many qualities. The Queen was clearly a woman of deep and profound Christian faith. She knew that there was and is a hope for us, given to us by God through Jesus Christ, a hope for resurrection, that though most things will pass, that hope in God is a constant. And that is also something that we need to remember. And so to finish, some verses from 2 Corinthians. When Paul writes, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. And so, in the light of the Queen's remarkable, faithful life, may we too hold on to the hope that she held on to, knowing that God always remains faithful, that though we may be faced with challenges, we shall not be overcome, that we do have a hope for the future.